No one understood why the judge was nervous until the woman took the stand. The pen dropped. It hit the wooden surface of the bench with a small, sharp sound, and nobody in courtroom 7 noticed. Nobody except the court reporter, Patricia Doon, who had worked in that building for 19 years and had never once seen Judge Raymond Holt drop anything. He picked it up, he set it down carefully, he folded his hands. The gallery was thin that morning, 8, maybe 9 people. A few of them relatives of one party or another. One elderly man who came to courtrooms the way other people went to parks, and a legal journalist named Colin Marsh, who covered the county beat for a mid-sized newspaper, and was there purely because his editor had sent him, and not because he expected anything worth printing. The case on the docket was a civil matter, property fraud. A developer named Gerald Fitch stood accused of falsifying the ownership records of a warehouse complex on the city's east side, quietly siphoning equity from the property's co-investors over a period of 8 years. It was the kind of case that appeared in newspapers on page 7, below the fold, with a photograph of a building rather than a person. Fitch sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit. He was a compact man, somewhere in his late 50s, with the kind of face that held its expression even when the expression was being held deliberately. His attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Louise Hargrove, shuffled papers with practiced calm. On the plaintiff's side, a younger attorney named Owen Park arranged his folders in a careful row and kept glancing toward the door. The courtroom had the particular silence of a room waiting to become something. The ceiling fans turned slowly. The morning light came through the east windows in flat, pale sheets. Raymond Holt had presided over cases in this building for 31 years. He had the kind of presence that made rooms quieter when he entered them, not through force, but through a quality that lawyers who appeared before him often described, later, over dinner, as weight. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray hair and dark eyes that moved across a courtroom the way a camera moves, steadily, without hurry, missing nothing. He was 64 years old. He had never been reversed on appeal for misconduct. He had never recused himself under pressure. He had received 2 commendations from the State Judicial Council and turned down a federal appointment in 2009 because, as he told the colleague who asked, he did not want to move. Patricia Doon noticed the pen drop because she noticed everything in that room. She noticed it the way she might notice a small change in the weather, a shift in pressure, too small to name, but enough to make you look at the sky. Holt did not look at the gallery. He looked at the papers in front of him. Owen Park called his first witness for the pretrial evidentiary hearing, a property assessor named Gerald Webb, who spoke in long, careful sentences about square footage and market value and comparable sales data. Louise Hargrove cross-examined him briskly. The assessor left the stand. Another witness came and went. It was ordinary, completely ordinary. Except that Raymond Holt, at some point in the middle of the assessor's testimony, had stopped writing notes. He sat with his pen in his hand and his notepad open in front of him, and he did not write a single word for 11 minutes. Colin Marsh, who had covered enough courtrooms to know what a judge in full attention looked like, found himself watching Holt instead of the witness. He could not have said why. He wrote nothing in his own notebook. He simply watched. The hearing broke for lunch at 12:15. Holt rose before the bailiff could announce it, and left the bench without his usual moment of surveying the room first. In the corridor outside courtroom 7, 2 attorneys from a different case were talking about a restaurant. A paralegal walked past with a stack of files. The building smelled, as it always did, of old carpet and institutional coffee. Nothing about the afternoon suggested that anything had changed. But Patricia Doon, eating her lunch alone at her desk as she did every day, thought about the pen. She thought about the 11 minutes of nothing written. She thought about the way Holt had left the bench, not quickly, not slowly, but in the specific manner of a person who had decided what to do and was doing it before they changed their mind. She finished her sandwich. She went back to work. She filed the thought away in the part of her mind where 19 years of small observations lived, unspoken and uncategorized. Court resumed at 1:30. Holt returned to the bench with his usual composure entirely restored. He ruled on 2 procedural objections with the precision that younger attorneys described, behind his back, as surgical. He set the schedule for the coming days of testimony. He dismissed the room at 4 o'clock and thanked the gallery for their patience in a voice that carried no trace of anything but courtesy. Colin Marsh walked out into the afternoon sun and stood on the courthouse steps for a moment. He opened his notebook. He had written down the time of each witness, a few numbers from the assessor's testimony, and one line at the bottom of the page that he did not remember writing. It said, "The judge is nervous." He looked at it for a long time. Then he closed the notebook and put it in his pocket and walked to his car. He did not throw the note away. The next morning, on the second day of pretrial proceedings, a woman arrived in the gallery at 8:47. She took a seat in the second row, on the right side, near the aisle. She wore a dark blue jacket and carried a small leather bag. Her hair was silver and cut short. She sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at the front of the room with the focused, quiet attention of someone who had spent a great deal of their life in rooms exactly like this one. She did not take notes. The bailiff gave her no particular attention. The other gallery members did not look at her twice. She was simply a woman in a courtroom, watching. When Raymond Holt entered and took his place on the bench, he looked out across the room in his usual way, left to right, slow, thorough. He reached the right side of the gallery. His gaze passed across the second row. And then it moved on. It moved on precisely the way a person's eyes move when they have already decided not to stop. Patricia Doone, who was seated at her station to the left of the bench, and whose angle of view included both the judge's face and the gallery simultaneously, saw it. She was not certain what she saw, but she filed it away in the same place as the pen, and the 11 minutes, and the early departure from the bench. 3 observations, 1 quiet growing shape. She turned back to her keyboard and began to type the day's record, word by word, as the room filled with voices and argument and the ordinary machinery of the law. Outside, the city moved through its Tuesday morning without any awareness that, in a courtroom on the 3rd floor of the County Justice Building, something was turning, not loudly, not dramatically, just turning. The way the mechanism of a clock turns, steadily, out of sight, with a precision that only becomes visible when the hands finally move. The woman's name was not in the witness list for the first 2 days. No one in that courtroom knew what she knew. No one knew what she had seen, or what she had lost, or how long she had waited for the date on her subpoena. She sat in the gallery on Tuesday, and she sat there again on Wednesday, and she watched Raymond Holt the way you watch something you understand completely. Owen Park, the plaintiff's attorney, knew. He was the only one who did. He had not told anyone else. He would not have to. Thursday morning was coming. The witness list for Thursday had her name on it. And on Wednesday evening, as Raymond Holt sat alone in his chambers with his robe still on its hook and the city going dark outside his window, he had not yet decided what he was going to do. He stood at the glass. He looked at the street below. He had 31 years of decisions behind him, each one made cleanly, each one made on the law. He had not slept in 2 nights. The window gave him back his own reflection, faint and gray against the lights of the city. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned, took his coat from the rack, and walked out of the building without speaking to anyone. His clerk, a young man named Aaron Briggs, heard the office door close and waited for a moment before stepping into the empty chambers. The robe was still on its hook. The desk lamp was still on. On the notepad at the center of the desk, in Holt's careful, even handwriting, there was a single line. Aaron read it. He did not understand it. He turned off the lamp, straightened the notepad, and went home. In the morning, the line would still be there, and by then, everyone would understand it. But that morning had not yet come. The gallery filled a little more on Thursday. Word had reached no one in particular, and yet somehow the room held 14 people instead of 9, which is the way courtrooms fill when something is about to happen that no one has announced. Owen Park arrived early. He arranged his folders in their careful row. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the bench. He looked at the door. At 8:51, the door to the courtroom opened, and the woman in the dark blue jacket walked in and took her seat. At 9 o'clock exactly, Raymond Holt walked out and took his place on the bench. He did not drop his pen. He did not look at the gallery. He opened the session and called the day's proceedings to order in a voice that was level and precise, and gave absolutely nothing away. And Patricia Doone, her fingers resting on her keyboard, thought, "He has decided." She did not know what he had decided. No one in that room did. But something was ending, and something else had already begun, and the only question left was which of them would say it first, the judge, or the woman who had come all this way to make him. The bailiff called the name. The woman stood. She walked to the front of the room, placed her hand on the surface of the stand, and took the oath in a clear, steady voice. She sat down, she looked at Owen Park, she waited. And in the second row of the gallery, Colin Marsh opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date and the time in the margin and underlined them both. He had been right about the note. He was always right about the notes. He pressed his pen to the page and waited for her to speak. Her name was Margaret Ellison. The courtroom did not react. Raymond Holt's hands, folded on the bench in front of him, did not move. But somewhere in the room, in the space between one breath and the next, something shifted, something that had been balanced for 2 days on the thinnest possible edge. And the shift was so quiet, so complete, that Patricia Doone felt it in her fingers before she heard it in the words. She typed the name into the record. Margaret Ellison. The clock on the wall above the door read 9:14. The fans turned. The light came through the east windows, flat and pale and indifferent to everything below. And Margaret Ellison looked at Owen Park and said simply that she was ready to begin. Outside, on the steps of the building, a pigeon landed on the railing and then flew away again, startled by nothing visible. The city went on. The clock moved. And in courtroom 7, the truth walked quietly toward the center of the room and took its seat and waited, as it had always waited, for someone to finally ask it the right question. The question was coming. Everyone in that room could feel it, even the ones who did not yet know why. The bailiff's voice faded, the room settled. Owen Park stood up, smoothed his jacket, and said, in a voice that was almost gentle, "Ms. Ellison, please tell the court your professional background." She did. And by the time she finished, nobody in courtroom 7 was looking at Gerald Fitch anymore. They were all looking at the judge. And Raymond Holt, for the first time in 31 years on the bench, was looking at his hands. He had known this moment was coming since the morning he read her name on the witness list, 6 weeks ago, in a document that arrived in his chambers in an unmarked envelope from the plaintiff's office. He had known it, and he had said nothing. Now the moment was here. The room was quiet. Margaret Ellison looked up from her hands, across the well of the court, past the attorneys and the defendant in the gallery, and she looked directly at Raymond Holt. She did not look away. And he did not look away. And in that silence, between two people who had known each other for 31 years, everything that had not been said between them filled the room so completely that even Colin Marsh, who understood nothing of their history, stopped writing and simply watched. Patricia Dune's fingers rested on her keyboard. The clock above the door read 9:17. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. And then Owen Park said, "Ms. Ellison," and the silence broke, and the testimony began, and the truth that had been sitting quietly in the back of the room for 2 days finally stood up and made itself impossible to ignore. Margaret Ellison spoke for 41 minutes without stopping. When she finished, the courtroom was a different room than the one it had been when she started. Gerald Fitch's attorney, Louise Hargrove, was on her feet before the last sentence finished. Her objection was sharp and well-constructed and technically sound, and Raymond Holt listened to it with his hands still folded on the bench and his eyes on the surface of the wood in front of him. Then he said, "Sustained in part." 2 words, his voice was level, his face gave nothing away. But Patricia Dune had typed enough of his rulings to know the difference between a ruling that came from the law and a ruling that came from a man who was trying to hold the law between himself and something he could not face directly. She typed the words into the record. She said nothing. She went on typing. And Raymond Holt sat on his bench in the room he had presided over for 31 years, and the person who had given him that room sat 12 feet away from him in the witness stand, and the thing that connected them and the thing that stood between them were exactly the same thing. His loyalty to her. His failure to name it. The clock moved. The fans turned. The morning light shifted in the windows, and Courtroom 7 went on being a courtroom, as it had always done, indifferent to the particular weight of what was happening inside it. In the corridor outside, Aaron Briggs stood with his back against the wall and his phone in his hand, reading the note he had found on the judge's desk the night before. He had photographed it before he turned off the lamp, without knowing why. Now he read it again. It said, "I should have told her." 5 words. Aaron looked at the closed door of Courtroom 7. He put his phone in his pocket. He waited. Inside, Margaret Ellison was answering Louise Hargrove's cross-examination with the patience and precision of a woman who had spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of pressure. Every question that was meant to rattle her did not rattle her. Every suggestion meant to cast doubt on her account met the same quiet, clear response. A date, a document number, a figure, a fact. She was not angry. She was something quieter than anger and more dangerous to the people who had wronged her. She was certain. And in his seat on the bench, Raymond Holt listened to her be certain, and he did not interrupt, and he did not intervene, and he did not do the thing he should have done 6 weeks ago, which was to stand up and say, "I cannot hear this case." He sat. He listened. He let the law move around him the way water moves around a stone, shaping itself to him, unable to move him, and slowly, over time, revealing exactly what he was. The session broke at 12:30. Holt did not take a recess before dismissing the room. He simply stood, said the words, and walked out. Aaron Briggs followed him to his chambers. The robe went back on its hook. Holt sat at his desk. He looked at the notepad. The 5 words were still there in his own handwriting, and he looked at them the way a person looks at something they wrote in a different life, recognizing it, unable to claim it. Aaron stood in the doorway. "Judge," he said, and then he did not say anything else because there was nothing else that was his to say. Holt looked up at him. He looked at the young man's face, which was careful and steady, and trying very hard not to show what it was showing. "Close the door," Holt said. Aaron did. He stood on the outside of it. He could hear nothing. He stood there anyway for a long time, in the corridor that smelled of old carpet and institutional coffee, in the building where he had worked for 3 years and believed, without ever putting it into words, that the people inside it were doing something that mattered. He stood there until his feet hurt. Then he sat down on the bench against the wall, and he waited, and the afternoon moved around him, and through the closed door of his judge's chambers, nothing made a sound. At 2:45, Raymond Holt opened the door. He was not wearing his robe. He had his coat on. He was carrying a single manila folder. He looked at Aaron. "Get me the presiding judge's office," he said. "Tell them I need 15 minutes before court resumes." Aaron nodded. He reached for his phone. "And Aaron," Holt said. Aaron looked up. "Thank you for staying." He said it the way a man says something he means completely and does not know how to say any other way. Then he walked down the corridor toward the presiding judge's office, and Aaron watched him go and press the call button and told himself very quietly that whatever was about to happen, at least something true was about to happen. Which was, in the end, what a courthouse was supposed to be for. The presiding judge's office was at the end of the west corridor, behind a door with a frosted glass panel that read, "The Honorable Diane Fuller, Presiding Judge." Holt knocked once. The door opened. He went inside. The door closed. 14 minutes later, it opened again. Holt came out alone. His face was composed. His coat was straight. He walked back down the corridor without looking at anyone he passed. He did not return to courtroom 7 that afternoon. A clerk delivered a notice to both parties at 3 o'clock. The notice was brief. It contained 4 sentences. It said that Judge Raymond Holt had recused himself from the matter of Ellison and others versus Gerald Fitch and Associates, effective immediately. It said that the case would be reassigned to an available member of the civil bench. It said that all proceedings to date remained on the record. It said that the court regretted any inconvenience caused by this development and thanked the parties for their patience. It did not say why. It did not need to. By 3:15, every attorney in the building knew. By 4 o'clock, the story had reached 2 local television stations. By 5, Colin Marsh had filed 1,200 words to his editor and was sitting in his car in the courthouse parking lot, reading them back on his phone, making small changes to the sentences, thinking about the note in his notebook that said the judge is nervous, thinking about how he had written it without knowing what it meant and how it had turned out to mean exactly everything. He pressed send. He put his phone in his cup holder. He sat in the parking lot while the light changed and the other cars left one by one, and the building went quiet behind its tall windows. He thought about Margaret Ellison on the witness stand that morning, the way she had answered every question without raising her voice, the way she had looked at Raymond Holt across the courtroom, not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, but with the particular expression of someone who has waited a very long time for a very specific thing and has finally stopped waiting. He thought about what that expression cost a person. He started the car. He drove home. He did not go to the building the next day, because there was no court the next day, but the day after that he was back in the gallery, early, in his usual seat, with his notebook open and his pen ready. The case was now assigned to Judge Carol Prentice. Gerald Fitch sat at the defense table in a different suit. Louise Hargrove arranged her papers. Owen Park arranged his folders in their careful row. Margaret Ellison was not in the gallery. She did not come back until it was time for her to testify again. When she did, she walked in the same way she had walked in on Thursday, straight-backed, unhurried, carrying her small leather bag, and she took her seat in the second row and she waited. And this time, when the judge entered the room and looked out across the gallery, there was nothing in that look except the law. Clean, simple, uncompromised. The way it was supposed to be. The way Raymond Holt, for 31 years, had made it. Until the one time he could not. His chambers were cleared on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after the recusal. Aaron Briggs helped carry the boxes to the car. There were not many of them. Holt traveled light, professionally speaking, a habit he had once told Aaron that kept a person from confusing their belongings with their identity. They worked in silence mostly, the kind of silence that is not uncomfortable but simply respectful of the weight of the moment. At one point, Aaron picked up the notepad from the desk. He started to put it in a box. "Leave it," Holt said. Aaron left it. The notepad stayed on the desk, on the surface where it had always sat, next to the lamp that was now switched off. They carried the last box to the elevator. In the lobby, Holt stopped and looked at the building around him. The marble floors, the high ceiling, the bronze figure of Justice above the main entrance, the people moving through it with their files and their arguments, and their need for the thing that he had spent his life trying to provide. He looked at it for a long time. Aaron stood beside him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and because some moments are not helped by words. Then Holt put on his hat, pushed open the heavy front door, and walked out into the afternoon. The door swung shut behind him. The building went on. The clock on the wall in courtroom 7 kept moving. And in the second row of the gallery, the seat that Margaret Ellison had occupied for 2 days was empty, as it had always been before she arrived, and as it would be again now that the thing she had come to do was done. The trial of Gerald Fitch concluded 11 weeks later. Judge Carol Prentice delivered the verdict on a Wednesday morning in early spring. The gallery was full. Both local television stations had cameras in the corridor. Owen Park sat at the plaintiff's table with his folders arranged in their careful row, and for the first time since the proceedings began, he let himself look at the gallery before the session opened. Margaret Ellison was in the second row. She nodded at him once. He turned back to the front of the room. The verdict was liable on all primary counts. Gerald Fitch was ordered to pay restitution to each of the co-investors he had defrauded. The figure was significant. The process of recovering it would take time. It would not be complete recovery. It never was in cases like this. But it was something real, something that could be held, something that put a number on what had been taken and required that number to be returned. Louise Hargrove filed a notice of appeal before the ink on the order was dry. Owen Park had expected it. He was ready. Outside the courthouse on the steps where the cameras were waiting, Margaret Ellison gave a short statement. She thanked the court. She thanked her attorneys. She said that the process had been long but that the outcome, imperfect as it was, represented what a functioning legal system could do when it was allowed to work without interference. She did not say Raymond Holt's name. A reporter asked her directly about the judge's recusal. She paused. She said, "I have nothing unkind to say about Judge Holt. He was a good judge for a long time. I wish things had been different. I think he does too." Then she walked down the steps, through the cluster of cameras and questions, and got into a car that was waiting at the curb, and the door closed, and the car pulled away. And that was the last public statement she ever gave about the matter. Raymond Holt did not watch the coverage of the verdict. He was at his house, which was a modest place on a quiet street on the north side of the city, and he was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and he was reading. Not legal documents, not case files. A novel, a long one with small print, the kind he had always meant to read and never had time for. The television was off. His phone was on the counter face down. He turned a page. Outside, the spring light fell across the yard, across the small patch of garden that his wife had planted years ago and that he had maintained, imperfectly, ever since she was gone. He turned another page. The coffee sat cold beside him. The garden sat quietly in the light. And Raymond Holt, who had spent 31 years making decisions that shaped other people's lives and who had made one decision, or rather one non-decision, that had shaped his own, sat in his kitchen and read his novel and let the day go by without asking it for anything. It was not peace exactly. It was something more honest than peace. It was a man living inside the consequence of his own choices, without flinching and without excuse, which is perhaps the closest any of us ever get to the thing that courts are built to deliver. Justice, not the kind that comes with a verdict. The kind that sits quietly in a kitchen on a spring afternoon, with a cold cup of coffee and an open book, and does not look away from what it sees in the window's reflection. In the courthouse on the north side of the city, Courtroom 7 went on hearing cases. New attorneys came through, new witnesses, new arguments, new moments of tension and relief and disappointment and surprise. Patricia Doone typed them all. Aaron Briggs moved to the chambers of a new judge, a woman named Judge Karen Lowe, who was rigorous and fair, and had not been on the bench long enough to have a history that could reach back and find her. Colin Marsh published his piece about the case. It ran on a Sunday, long form, and it was read widely enough that his editor gave him a section of his own for the work he did afterward, covering the places where the law and the people inside it failed to match each other, and the rarer, quieter stories of when they did. He kept the notebook. He kept every notebook. On the inside cover of the one from that week, in handwriting he had always been told was too small to read comfortably, was the note he had written on the first day. The judge is nervous. He had written it before he knew anything. He had been right. That was the thing about courtrooms, he had decided. They were full of the truth before anyone said a word. You just had to be quiet enough and patient enough and honest enough with yourself to see it. It was there in the dropped pen. It was there in the 11 minutes of silence. It was there in the way a man's gaze moved across a room and did not stop where it wanted to stop. And it was there in the 5 words on a notepad in an empty office, in the handwriting of a man who had finally, in the only way available to him, told her. I should have told her. He had not told her in time, but in the end, in the most public and irrevocable way possible, he had told the truth. Which was not nothing. In the business of justice, it was rarely nothing. It was, most of the time, the place where everything began.